This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Tunisia's president directs the army to supervise the coronavirus response as cases continue to rise. Zambia deploys troops to the capital to quell pre-election violence. And no quarantine for EU and US arrivals as long as you have 2 shots. The UK eases travel restrictions. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. U.S. President Joe Biden's ban on American investment in some Chinese firms takes effect. And businesses in Tanzania grapple with increased costs as data charges rise. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's start today's program in Tunisia, where President Kais Saied has issued a decree to create an operations room supervised by the military. It will manage the COVID-19 pandemic response. Meanwhile, the Military Health Department is setting up more field hospitals to boost the country's pandemic response. Adnan Chouachi has more.
The Military Health Department set up a field hospital in the governorate of Manuba. It includes 2 complete ICUs, the first with 50 IC beds and the second with 50 oxygen-fitted beds. This field hospital also includes 100 ventilators and 2 oxygen generators, ensuring oxygen supply with a daily production of 3,000 liters.
An independent generator provides autonomy in electricity for this field hospital. The safety of patients is guaranteed. This facility will reinforce the capacity of hospitals to step up the fight against the pandemic.
The number of field hospitals for COVID-19 patients in Tunisia now stands at 7. 5 additional field hospitals will be set up in other governorates in the coming days.
Following the President's orders, we will set up a field hospital in each city to take care of patients who need medical assistance and oxygen.
Acting Health Minister Mohamed Trabelsi noted that the problem of shortage of oxygen persists in Tunisia. Trabelsi added that the quantity of oxygen consumed in hospitals has increased 6-fold since the outbreak of the pandemic in the country.
Oxygen shortage remains a real problem. Importing oxygen is very challenging during the pandemic. Tunisia produces only 100,000 litres of oxygen per day, while our daily need is 250,000 litres. We need to import some 150,000 oxygen litres per day. It's not easy to find providers on the international market.
President Kais Saied said that a new operations room will manage the pandemic response. The facility will include representatives of the Ministries of National Defense, Interior Affairs and Foreign Affairs, as well as the Health, Transport and Environment departments. The COVID-19 Pandemic Management Operations Room is in charge of monitoring the development of the health situation in the country. It will also monitor the strategic stockpile of pandemic supplies, including pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, while Tunisia tightens its pandemic response, the UK is easing theirs. Fully vaccinated travellers from the United States and the European Union can now visit the UK without quarantine. The relaxation of rules affects passengers arriving from countries that are on the UK's amber list, with France being the only exception. CGTN correspondent Naveed Jabakal has more.
Reunited at last. For the first time in months, people from the US and the EU can now come to the UK without the need to quarantine on arrival. Welcome news for the millions potentially impacted.
We got married during the pandemic, and it's really exciting to come here and spend the whole amount of time with him and his family instead of having to sit by myself for a couple weeks.
So last time I was here was kind of Christmas of 2019. So last year I think was a tough year for a lot of people, a lot of families. And I think we're part of like the first wave of US residents coming in with part of the new restrictions being released, which is really exciting.
Very happy, very happy. As you can imagine, coming home after such a long time can be so exciting.
It won't be business as usual though. Passengers will still need to take a COVID-19 test before departure and another on the second day after arriving. France is currently excluded from the changes, but for London's Heathrow Airport, once the busiest in the world, getting international travel moving again is vital.
Aviation is all about connectivity, and we're a small island nation, we're a trading nation, and yet our air routes have been grounded for the last 18 months. Now finally we can start getting back to normal, and in particular connect with the United States, our biggest single trading partner.
The industry says this is a positive move, but it wants things to open up even quicker. Fewer than 1 million passengers passed through Heathrow in June. That's down almost 90% on pre-pandemic levels. Airports and the wider travel sector here want more destinations to have quarantine-free travel when rules are reviewed again this week.
But new watch lists for certain locations will mean travel remains uncertain and likely to put off many people from booking trips. Meanwhile, the economic cost is mounting, with almost 10% of the UK economy dependent on travel and tourism. Chancellor Rishi Sunak is among those pushing for restrictions to ease. But with coronavirus variants previously coming in from abroad and the virus still spreading here, officials say they'll be cautious about moving any quicker. Naweed Jabarkil, CGTN, London.
Well, let's turn to Zimbabwe now, where a senior official is condemning the United States' attempt to politicize the origins of the coronavirus. Monica Mutsvangwa, the Zimbabwean Minister of Information, says the move is likely to undermine global efforts to fight the pandemic.
The experience of the spread of COVID-19 and the constant mutation of variants serve to highlight the vital nature of this international cooperation in fighting this disease. This is the founding charter of the World Health Organization. Political finger-pointing and accusations that stigmatize nations and communities have no room in the fight against pandemics that threaten collective humanity. Injecting Sino-US rivalry and other forms of geopolitical and ideological prejudices only poisons the atmosphere, while it undermines objective scientific research as the only viable tool to stem the pandemic menace. Diplomacy should create conducive conditions for scientists to do their work.
Right, let's turn our attention now to news coming out of Zambia. The army has been deployed in parts of the capital, Lusaka, this to quell escalating political violence ahead of elections slated for later this month. CGTN's Farai Mokutuya reports.
Zambian President Edgar Lungu said he has allowed the Zambian Army, Air Force and National Service to help the Zambia police deal with the security situation that is heating up ahead of polls on the 12th of August. Political rallies are banned due to COVID-19, but the police has struggled to deal with violent clashes between rival supporters of the ruling PF party and the main opposition UPND. 2 supporters of the ruling PF party were killed in Lusaka on Friday. 4 people have been arrested in connection with the deaths. President Lungu said soldiers that are already on the ground in some parts of Lusaka would help prevent similar incidents happening and could be deployed in other parts of the country if the situation demands it. The Zambian leader is standing for a second term in the upcoming election. His main challenger is UPND leader Hakainde Hichilema, whom he narrowly beat in a closely contested election in 2016. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
There's been mixed response on the continent after the African Union Commission granted observer status to Israel. CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at reactions from Arab African states.
There has been a muted response from most Arab countries towards Israel's new status as African Union observer. So far, only Algeria has come out to publicly denounce the AU's decision. Experts say Israel's recent normalization of ties with Arab countries such as North Africa's Morocco and Sudan, is a factor in this decision.
Of course, it has facilitated Israel's status as an observer, or granting this status to Israel in the AU. Normalizing relations between Israel and some Arab countries and reattaching Israel to Africa is such a diplomatic success by the Israelis, of course.
Another possible reason for a lack of reaction from Arab countries is the multiple conflicts and challenges in the region that have pushed the Palestinian cause into the back seat. While countries siding with Israel gained US economic and political support, some analysts believe Israel will stand to gain more from warming relations.
Israel's presence in the AU is of no good to the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially that, again, Israel will only be trying to pressure African Union and African states to achieve the most of its interests, especially when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel is very pragmatic when it comes to its interests, and it will not be of a great help to the African Union. On the contrary, it will be only looking after its interests, especially economic ones, especially that Africa now is a place of race and competition between regional and international powers.
In past years, there would have been an Arab uproar against the AU's move to grant observer status to Israel. However, a lack of official reaction to the decision shows a clear shift in approach towards Israel since the normalization of ties, reshaping future Arab policies with Tel Aviv. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Staying with this story, the South African government has strongly condemned the decision by the African Union Commission to grant Israel observer status, calling it unilateral and shocking. Here's CGTN's Yoli Sanjamela with that story.
In a statement released by the International Relations Department, the South African government says the granting of the AU observer status to Israel is even more shocking, considering that it's coming in the same year that the Palestinian people were bombarded at the hands of the Israeli government, leaving many dead and displaced. The statement continues to assert that South Africa believes that the unjust actions committed by Israel offend the letter and spirit of the Charter of the AU.
We are concerned about what is happening in Palestine. The continued situation there in Palestine, in our view, militates against just warmly accepting Israel as an observer in Africa, particularly in view of the positions and the views that we have taken ourselves as a country against the state of Israel on this issue. So we are opposed to their admission.
South Africa believes that as long as Israel is not willing to negotiate a peace plan without preconditions, it is not supposed to get an AU observer status. President Ramaphosa decried the fact that the AU Commission chair failed to consult when granting Israel observer status.
We've expressed our deep concern about that because it's a decision that was taken by the chair of the Commission and without consulting the member states. Certainly we were not consulted.
Israel enjoyed an observer status at the Organization of African Union until 2002, when that organization was replaced by the African Union, while Palestine already enjoys observer status at the AU. South Africa will now ask the AU Commission to give a briefing to all member states on the decision. Yoli Sanjamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's take a look now at news coming from China. Officials in the country's Henan province, central province of Henan, have raised the death toll from devastating floods to 302, with 50 people still missing. Record amounts of rain hit the provincial capital Zhangzhou 2 weeks ago. Direct economic losses stand at nearly $17 billion. A team has now been set up to investigate the disaster. Feng Yilei has more.
然后这个是消毒药片，然后这两个是消毒的这个手消。 The Henan Catering and Hotel Association has joined forces with the e-commerce delivery company Meituan to give free disinfectant kits, renovation funds and new equipment to local caterers after the floods.
There's disinfectant powder, disinfectant, and kitchen towels in the kits. 4,000 kits have been distributed and 1,000 merchants have received them. We have also promoted training manuals and service guides to caterers to support the resumption of work.
More than 3.7 million party members in Henan province helped clean up streets, spray disinfectant and repair infrastructure.
The power company sent 7 teams to install and repair infrastructure, and each village was allocated 2 or 3 generators.
An expert team went to the worst-hit areas. It pumped water from fields and replanted cash crops like sunflowers for oil, which have a short growing period and high economic value.
Sunflowers are mainly used for oil extraction. They grow in just 80 days. That can help reduce farmers' losses.
Henan province has now repaired 1,580 water conservancy projects and restored more than 3,000 rural roads. Authorities say that most industries that were shut down due to the floods are now operating again. Feng Yilei, CGTN.
Time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, we take a deeper look at traditional beliefs, stigma, and the treatment of mental illnesses in Africa.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You got to get out, go there, and you find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
The UK has summoned Iran's ambassador to London following a deadly attack on an Israeli-managed oil tanker. The United States, Israel and Britain have blamed Iran, saying it was a deliberate strike. Tehran has denied responsibility, but says it will not hesitate to protect its security and national interests. 2 crew members, a Briton and Romanian, were killed in the attack when an armed drone attacked the ship off the coast of Oman. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan has begun a 2-day state visit to Rwanda. This is her first visit to the country as president. She held private talks with Rwanda's leader Paul Kagame on a number of issues, including improving bilateral relations that have at times been frosty. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
President Samia Suluhu Hassan arrived in Rwanda to a warm reception. She has now visited 4 out of the other 5 countries in the East African community since taking office in March this year. Her host, President Paul Kagame, sees Tanzania as a key partner in developing East Africa.
I look forward, Madam President, to continuing to work together towards a stronger and more prosperous East African community.
Decades-long relations between the 2 countries saw Tanzania host around 500,000 refugees following the 1994 Rwandan genocide. And over the years, Rwanda has depended on the port of Dar es Salaam for most of its imports. President Hassan says the relations have room to grow.
Tanzania and Rwanda are into business and investment, and the good relations we have provide ample opportunities that we can use to grow business and investments for the benefit of both sides.
The two countries have not always seen eye to eye. In the past, leaders have disagreed on politics and security. More recently, Rwanda showed indications that it did not approve of Tanzania's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tanzania appears to be reaping the lion's share of economic benefits from its relations with Rwanda. UN statistics show that on average, Tanzanian exports to its neighbor are worth around $250 million annually, compared to Rwanda's $5 million. Prior to the visit, the two countries had plans to jointly implement power and railway projects. But some political analysts argue that those plans and any future ones will require a lot of consensus to succeed.
And President Kagame's way of doing things is quite different from how President Samia ways of doing things. And of course, quite different from how Tanzanian style of doing things is. And when it comes to that point, you should expect that on the way, these countries will of course, part ways. And this is not something that is unusual. This is not something that we should fear. It's something we have to embrace, because that's how it works.
President Hassan and her counterpart have signed cooperation agreements on information technology as well as COVID-19 and discussed regional security. The two countries are hoping shared interests can bring the two nations and the East African region closer. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
There is growing recognition of the prevalence of mental illnesses in Africa. However, the range of medical services available remains alarmingly low, and mental disorders are still stigmatized. In some communities, a tension exists between the traditional, the spiritual, and the medical in the treatment of mental disorders. I traveled to Kisumu, Kenya to explore this issue further for this episode of Panorama Africa. Now, be warned, this story does contain images that some viewers may find disturbing. A port city on the shores of Lake Victoria, Kisumu is the largest city in western Kenya. Its social, political and economic significance has made it a key player in Kenya's pre- and post-independent history. It's also home to Father John Pesa, founder of the Holy Ghost Coptic Church of Africa and a self-proclaimed healer of the mentally ill. Father John Pesa's Sunday service is well underway for a congregation of the faithful and his patients. It is a smaller crowd than usual due to pandemic regulations, he tells us. Even so, it is clear the cleric enjoys a loyal and abiding following.
How many people love me?
Father Pesa's reputation precedes him. He's been healing the sick since 1961, he claims, but no stranger to controversy. Father Pesa's methods and practice, including chaining his patients, have earned him fierce criticism.
Imagine you are alone dealing with 5 unstable people. What would you do? And yet some have the wandering disease, where they just move around aimlessly. If you leave that person, they might just wander off. What if a person gets hit by a car? What will you tell the family that put this patient under your care? So we chain them.
Unexpectedly, Pesa conducts a seemingly staged demonstration of how his healing works.
He is going into a trance. His mind is resting. I'm the one who produces his spiritual power. It's the power that is doing this. That is the power of God that heals people at Coptic Church. God is the only one who knows what he does and how it heals. It is a natural factor beyond my human knowledge. Even I don't know.
Natural factor beyond human knowledge.
Whenever I touch someone and they fall into a trance, gradually they begin to change. That change is what shows me the person is healed.
A short drive from Pesa's church brings us to Maseno University, where we meet Professor Otieno Omolo. The retired physician turned lecturer was among Kenya's first cohort of child psychiatrists and once led the country's only psychiatric hospital. His disregard for Father Pesa is evident.
That is somebody who is completely ignorant of whatever he's doing. And most of the things you are talking about, I'm aware of them. People being chained and all, those are criminal activities. And it is unfortunate that the judicial arm or the executive arm is not taking action against that.
The judicial arm has tried. Last year, a court ordered Pesa to pay damages of up to $5,000 for violating a young man's freedom of movement and right to education. But the courts can do little when patients are voluntarily placed in the cleric's care by their own relatives. A former patient's unshakable trust in Father Pesa and his methods is evidence of that.
Yes, at one time when I was like somehow becoming violent, then I was also chained. Yes, but that is just to control those who may be violent. You see, some of these illnesses, they may not be treated fully in our hospitals or medically. So that's why prayers are also important. And faith healing is very real and it works.
In many cases, faith healers operate in a grey area, not formally regulated either by the church or government, and this is where abuses can take place. In 2020, a Human Rights Watch report revealed how men, women and children with psychosocial disabilities are chained or locked in confined spaces in 60 countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East and the Americas. Professor Omolo suggests the formalization of spiritual counseling would help eliminate abuses. After all, spirituality can contribute to an individual's healing.
Now, as a scientist, as a medic, of course, I don't think prayers would help anybody as such directly. However, I'm very much aware of spirituality. I'm very much aware of the fact that when you are talking of quality of life, which of course is both physical and mental, isn't it? The issue of the spiritual domain is important. People who have strong faith or who believe in something generally tend to have a better outcome than somebody who just has no belief in anything. Because it gives us, most times spirituality gives us some sort of a direction.
The influence of the spiritual domain gives legitimacy to alternative healing practices, especially on a continent where clinical mental health services are scarce. In Africa, the number of psychiatrists per 100,000 people ranges from 0.01 in Burundi, 0.2 here in Kenya, and 2.4 in Mauritius. But this is a far cry from high-income countries with an average of 9 psychiatrists per 100,000 people. The leading causes of mental illness in Africa include poverty, war and conflict, insufficient resources, and living with other diseases such as HIV/AIDS or cancer. The coronavirus pandemic has raised levels of stress and trauma globally, making the situation even more dire. A 2016 UN report identified depression, anxiety, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder as the most common mental illnesses in Africa. But often, lack of awareness renders these disorders invisible until sufferers display severe and dramatic symptoms. To make matters worse, Africa has insufficient outpatient facilities and hospital beds for patients with mental illnesses. This means that the proportion of Africans who go untreated ranges from 75% in South Africa to 90% in Ethiopia and Nigeria. This is known as the treatment gap. In South Africa, the treatment gap is sometimes filled by traditional healers known as sangomas, who diagnose and heal through divination, herbal medicine and rituals. The ability to heal is considered a gift or a calling bestowed by one's ancestors that must then be honed and developed through guided training. Sangomas claim to treat physical, spiritual and mental disorders.
We give them some things to smoke and medicines to drink, but it depends on what's disturbing them. Sometimes it's because they have a spiritual calling, or they're dealing with bad spirits.
Where traditional treatments might not work, Gogo Shabalala refers her patients to medical doctors.
We work together with doctors. We respect each other's gifts. You have gifts and I have mine.
Unethical healers have been known to take advantage of people's beliefs.
Some people use a gift for the wrong things. They go to school to become a traditional healer, but don't actually stay the course. They don't finish. Ultimately, a Sangoma is a healer, not a killer.
There is a shift emerging in the policy response to mental health in parts of Africa. In 2020, Kenya became the first country on the continent to appoint a task force and a presidential advisor on mental health. This signaled a growing awareness of the scale of mental health problems.
In 2019, the government recognized the need to really look at mental health in its totality in our country against the background of the fact that depression was going up, domestic violence was going up, suicides were going up, alcohol use disorders were going up. And our task force was asked to establish why. The task force went right through the country, talked to all manner of people in the private sector, in religion, armed forces, the government itself, and reported in July of last year that in fact we have a huge problem with mental health in our country against a very small investment of finance and of human resources.
Dr. Njenga is also the chairperson of a chain of private mental health hospitals in Nairobi. For those who can afford it, the facilities treat psychiatric disorders in a safe and secure environment. The hospital's emphasis on dignity is reflected in the design, clinical approach and relationship with patients, all in an effort to produce the best outcomes and fight the stigma associated with mental illness.
The reason people stigmatized mental health before is because they were hopeless and helpless, and they felt that there's nothing we could do to help them. Now, as the dark night is coming to an end, people are realizing that actually the earlier you get care, the more likely that you get a good outcome out of it. And that, for me, is what will hit the biggest blow against stigma: knowledge, information, and good outcomes.
Awareness and destigmatization is also being driven by a new generation of mental health advocates, such as broadcast journalist Eugene Mweri.
I went into mental health as a whole because of my own personal story. So early in 2017, I was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, that came after my first suicide attempt. Let me remind you that in Kenya, here we are, suicide is a criminal offense under the Constitution, which means you can get arrested for trying to take your own life. You can end up in a cell. Knowing that, I still went public with my own story. Nobody deserves to be at the point where they feel that you are so alone. I mean, you're deserving of nothing, that there's nothing left to tether you to this world. Nobody deserves to get to that point at all.
Through advocacy and establishing an emergency support network, Mweri is changing the narrative around mental health and connecting those in crisis with professionals. It's work he does not take lightly.
The generations that are coming are more emotionally aware, more in touch with their emotions than the generations before. So the idea of talking things out needs to be encouraged now more than ever.
More needs to be done for mental health in Africa, but there is hope.
As a person who lives with a mental health condition and a psychosocial disability,
Young people across the continent are bringing the conversation on mental wellness to the fore.
Learn about mental health, share with your friends so we can have...
Alongside the work of experts, ethical healers and medical practitioners, mental health policy and practice may well change for the better. Mtongana, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya. Let's go to Ethiopia now, where government has announced it will work with the UN to open humanitarian corridors in the Tigray region. Addis Ababa said the international community must pressure armed groups in the region to cooperate with these relief efforts. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
The humanitarian situation in Tigray is still worrying for both the Ethiopian government and the international community. And over the last couple of weeks alone, 2 top UN officials have visited Ethiopia, including Martin Griffith, the Undersecretary Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs. The UN has been calling for unfettered humanitarian access and previously urged the TPLF group to accept a ceasefire.
So this ceasefire, which has been unilaterally taken by the government, has not been reciprocated by the outlawed forces of the TPLF. He urged the Undersecretary that the international community should condemn or put pressure on this force to behave.
UN reports say that more than 150 trucks filled with humanitarian aid are stuck in areas bordering the Afar and Tigray regions. The government says TPLF-related attacks have made relief services difficult. TPLF source accused the government of the same.
And this also shows efforts.
The office of the Ethiopian Prime Minister said it had delivered aid even before the declaration of the ceasefire.
Prior to the humanitarian ceasefire, up to 500 or more than 580,000 quintals of fertilizer had been purchased, with more than 530,000 quintals that had been stored within storages in Mekelle and also distributed through cooperatives or through 10 cooperatives within the region. And with related to the departure of the defense forces as part of the humanitarian ceasefire when they were exiting Mekelle, or at the point in time of exiting Mekelle, more than 400,000 quintals of wheat and 2.5 million liters of edible oil had been stocked in warehouses for distribution to those that were in need. And this is also, in addition to that, around 14 million liters of fuel had also been left in depot for any needs within the region.
The United Nations says 100 trucks filled with food and other supplies are needed in Tigray per day to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. Many fear with the ongoing conflict in the north, more people will be affected, and so say swift humanitarian assistance is needed. The international community in general, and recently the French government in particular, are calling for the peaceful resolution of the war in Tigray. Group Data CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Your business news up next. Here's Uche with the latest.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. U.S. President Joe Biden's ban on American investments in some Chinese firms takes effect. And businesses in Tanzania grapple with increased costs as data charges rise.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Now, an executive order from U.S. President Joe Biden took effect on Monday to ban American investments in about 59 Chinese firms. Now, Beijing has criticized the move and threatened countermeasures. Here's CGTN's Zhao Yunfei reporting.
Biden has expanded a Trump-era order to restrict Chinese companies. It bans Americans from trading securities of dozens of Chinese companies with alleged links to the Chinese military. The blacklist was first signed by President Trump last November. China Telecom and China Mobile were among the 31 firms. In June, President Biden added 28 companies to the list, which now has a total of 59 companies. It takes effect on August 2nd. Biden's executive order cites security concerns, while Beijing calls it an abuse of the concept of national security.
China urges the United States to respect market laws and principles, cancel these so-called lists that suppress Chinese companies, and provide Chinese companies with a fair, just and non-discriminatory business and investment environment. China will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises.
An expert says the move is an attempt by the U.S. to decouple from China.
This is actually a political situation in that country, and they would like to find some enemy or adversary for their own sake, for some specific groups of interests to take China as the threat. It's not good for the relationship between the two countries, and of course it's not good for the public in the two countries.
Professor Tang says high-tech companies in both countries will be affected, but the U.S. cannot restrict China's progress in technological innovation.
The development of high-tech and science is a natural development for any country, for any individual. At this moment, the United States can not stop it, stop the cooperation, stop the development.
Professor Tang says while the Biden administration has continued his predecessor's aggressive approach against China, it is unlikely China will make any compromises in the area of technology. He says the two sides should seek a new model for future cooperation. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Beijing.
And heading to Tanzania now, individuals and businesses in the country are grappling with higher costs of airtime and internet data. This follows the passing of the government's 2021-2022 budget, which of course introduced a new controversial levy on mobile money transactions. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando with the details.
Joyce Mujaya depends on her phone to run her online retail clothing business. 2 years ago, she began posting clothes online to build a customer base with hopes of one day setting up a physical shop. However, the recently introduced mobile money levies are making it harder for her to do business.
Clients who want to pay via mobile money are reluctant to incur additional costs to pay for a product because the money they are sending to me has already been slashed on their end due to the levy. So what happens is that I end up incurring losses.
The new levies are not limited to mobile money transactions. Excise duty on airtime in Tanzania stands at 17%. Mobile services such as calls, SMS and data are subject to an 18% value-added tax. The government says it is paying attention to growing public concern over the rising cost of communication.
I ask that the public remains calm in this matters. We will continue to offer explanations in all areas that require clarifications, and we will take steps in the areas that require action so that the building of our nation can continue.
So far, the introduction of a mobile transaction levy has seen the cost of transfers double. The Mobile Network Operators Association says the levy has already resulted in a 45% drop in revenues.
Tanzania is the second largest telecoms market in East Africa behind Kenya. The market here has grown from 12 million unique mobile phone subscribers in 2010 to over 25 million last year.
Despite numerous levies, mobile phone subscribers in the country enjoy the lowest internet costs in East Africa. However, Joyce feels things could still get better.
At least half of the present cost. It will make it easier for someone to afford because we can't expect the government to completely remove the levies.
The government says levies in the telecom sector are supposed to finance development in rural areas. It hopes Tanzanians will see things the same way and keep using their mobile phones. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And moving on, the Central Bank of Tunisia says the country needs to put in place international financial reporting standards in order to help guide the operations of its financial sector. Now, the IFRS was created to improve transparency as well as accountability and, of course, efficiency of financial markets around the world. Here's Adnan Eshawshi with the details from Tunis.
The Institute of Chartered Accountants of Tunisia said that the Tunisian financial sector's adoption of international financial reporting standards will help ensure good governance, competitive equity and transparency in the regulation of the banking market.
The adoption of the International Financial Reporting Standards is an important strategic reform for the economy in general and the financial sector in particular. These standards are a common international accounting language, allowing for uniform financial reporting that promotes comparability of performance and capital flow.
The president of the Tunisian Professional Association of Banks and Financial Institutions explained that there are many challenges facing the implementation of those international standards in the country.
The first problem is the readiness of Tunisian banks and financial institutions for the adoption of these international standards. Most banks do not have the required data and information to respect internationally recognized accounting standards. The second problem is the mentality of the clients, who may not be willing to provide personal information to the banks.
The head of the Union of Maghreb Banks says adopting international standards will allow Tunisian banks to mobilize external resources.
30% of the Tunisian banking sector is made up of banks with foreign capital. They are already implementing IFRS standards and did not wait for 2021. This is a good example for other Tunisian banks seeking external funding.
Experts say implementing the IFRS project needs to be monitored by the Central Bank of Tunisia as part of its strategic plan. The Central Bank of Tunisia said that the IFRS standardization system compels Tunisian authorities to be more demanding in terms of transparency and governance. The governor of the Apex Bank stressed the need to implement this single set of high-quality global standards. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, U.S. aid chief Samantha Power has hailed Sudan's transition while on a visit to Khartoum. She met with some officials and discussed Sudan's urgent economic and humanitarian needs. The country has been going through a rocky transition since the ouster in April 2019 of President Omar al-Bashir.
Everyone in Sudan is grappling with inflation, higher prices. That is very difficult. And we, above all, as the United States, want to find a way to partner with you to reinvigorate the economy, to attract foreign investment to this country, to improve the investment climate so that big companies and banks and others want to come to Sudan, that they see that this is the new Sudan, that they can provide job opportunities to your young people who helped make this revolution and this transformation possible. The thorniest issues between the United States government and the Sudanese government have been addressed in recent months and in the last couple of years in a way that makes it possible to have engagements that involve two friends staring out at a problem together.
And in some company news, Square, the payments firm founded by Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey, has now purchased Afterpay for $29 billion this Monday. The move with the buy now, pay later pioneer is expected to create a global transactions giant. It supports the popularity of a business model that has changed consumer credit by charging merchants a fee to offer small point-of-sale loans that shoppers repay in interest-free installments. Now, the all-stock buyout will value the shares of $92.65, according to a joint statement by both of the companies. And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, the Central Bank of Tanzania directs $432 million to financial institutions in the country to help them lend to the private sector. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Your sports news coming up after the break.